Welcome back to the county seat. So far today we have been talking about payment in lieu of taxes, a fee that the federal government pays to counties. We've also talked about how important these funds are as a proportion of counties' operating budgets. But what would counties do if indeed those funds went away?
Because of the last 18 months and what Tooele County is faced with our financial situation, we have already begun addressing two elements of our funding that have been short-term in nature or up for question, like PILT is, with our citizens this past year. As we've addressed citizens, these short-term monies have been used to pay for long-term projects. We have to ask ourselves as a local community, a local jurisdiction, do we want certain services to be thought of more permanently, and if so, are we prepared as citizens here to pay for them in the event that mitigation fees dry up or PILT goes away or is greatly reduced? And very recently, in the last couple of months, we've even mentioned that at our county commission meetings with the expectation that we are beginning that dialogue. Our vehicle for that has been the addressing of PILT specifically with the municipal service tax. And so right now that is the process that we expect to undertake with and including some town hall meetings late spring, early summer to address just this, which is to say, if this is historically how we've been using and allocating PILT monies when we've received them, if they go away, do we, the citizens, want those services reduced, or are we willing to pay more in additional taxes that the local government imposes in order to guarantee that those extra taxes collected will first and foremost guarantee ongoing providing of these services? And if we continue to receive monies like PILT or mitigation fees, it's extra, it's discretionary. It might give us fluff that if they go away, those are the first things cut.
While one route seeks to cut services or raise taxes, another alternative would be to find a reliable source of predictable revenue.
We'd like to see a permanent solution by using Land and Water Conservation Fund. That's money that comes from offshore oil, and currently there's about $1 billion a year that's in that figure that's designated to go towards purchase of private lands by the federal government. We'd say, you know, you've bought enough of those lands, let's take some of that money and pay the bills you've got on PILT and other things. We'd like to see that, you know, has a good potential of being a revenue source to fund PILT. Because that's the issue now, is they have to have an offset to do it, and so, you know, funding, everybody agrees to PILT that it's necessary, but, you know, how do you fund it's the question.
Beyond the solutions of how to plan for the disappearance of PILT or finding a permanent funding source, there is also the idea that there is a much larger problem, particularly in the West. A problem that fundamentally revolves around the disproportionate amount of land that the federal government controls within a number of the western states and counties.
Okay, this is House Bill 148, Transfer of Public Lands Act and related study.
I guess this just reemphasizes the need to have the lands transferred to the state so that we can use our natural resources and generate the revenue that potentially is out there.
Given the fact that every local county with large portions of federal lands, they are dependent to a small degree on those revenues because of that ownership interest. And if that ownership interest, if they're not going to treat it as an obligation that they have, they need to discharge that obligation and bring it back to the states. In fact, even if they were continuing to pay the PILT, the country, our wonderful country, the United States, is in jeopardy.
The apparent inability of the federal government to manage these lands for their intended purpose, which was to raise revenue for the U.S. Treasury, and the potential earnings that lie in these lands through responsible development, is widening what was once called the Sagebrush Rebellion into an alliance of many more states. Here's Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski on the subject.
The federal government's broke here. We can't continue to pay counties to not utilize the lands within their boundaries. And Mr. Chairman, you have appropriately suggested where we need to go with this. You need to be able to access the resources that are on your lands. We either need to utilize our federal lands to generate the revenue and the jobs for our rural communities, or we should divest the federal government of those lands and let the states or the counties, the boroughs manage them.
PILT debate is artificial. It's caught up in today's ideology as far as what's going on with the federal budget. And now somebody has to pay, and they start with us. And I think we would say basically, you guys don't pay your PILT bill, well, we're going to put your federal property up for auction.
I think as we look at the larger discussion of federal land transfer, I think that it's a very timely discussion. You know, many communities that are unhappy with land management decisions at the federal level, frankly, many believe that the states may be a better manager of those lands, and you know, it begs the question, you know, who should own these lands? And the federal government permanently owns over 600 million acres of land in this country in which you know, those decisions affect people. I think that's a permanent thing. I think as local governments are unable to collect property taxes to pay for services on that large federal estate, the federal government needs to find a permanent solution to paying its fair share.
This conversation today does need to recognize that Congress is aware of the difficulties that face counties in PILT funding, and for the time being they have found an answer. But it still begs the question of what happens when the makeup of Congress changes and that membership is different. Will it also bring a change of heart and leave Utah's rural counties bearing the brunt of some really difficult financial decisions? You know, it takes that concept, which was one time called crazy talk, of a transfer of public lands, and sheds a new light on it, making it a much more reasonable proposition to consider. Thank you for watching today on the County Seat. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Become involved in the conversation and be a part of the solution. We welcome your comments at our Facebook page, thecountyseat.tv, and you can join our blog discussion. It goes through the week on our website, thecountyseat.tv. Thanks for being with us. We'll look for you next week on The County Seat.